for the foreseeable future, humans will always be in the loop. AI will be assistive, and therefore, at least over the next decade or so, I would think that your choices around doing law is one that is perfectly valid, so long as you understand that you have to be ahead of the curve of the assistive technology that you will receive at AI.
Tell me about an instance or a decision which you had to make, a high stake deal, where the data was telling you one thing, but your intuition was telling you something else.
I have to confess that, that question tempts one to give an answer of the fact that, you had an intuition on something and it worked right. But I have to also tell you that, intuition can be wrong in equal number of instances.
Tell me, is it difficult to do a negotiation with your internal teams, leadership, stakeholders, or the external parties or the vendors and other people who are outside the organization?
You've asked a question which merits a much longer discussion than we don't do a podcast.
You can be 100% honest with your fingers crossed. Saurabh, hey, good evening. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Prayank, and I hope you're well. Thanks for having me.
I'm doing amazing. Thank you. It's good to have you here, Saurabh. So, since we were talking about how do we start the podcast, I think the best way to start the conversation would be to know who Saurabh is. And instead of going on LinkedIn and just browsing through the story which you have wonderfully written about you, I think it would make sense to know your highlights from the best part of your life, like the first 10 years, then 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and 30 and beyond. So I would love to know some of the best moments you carry from these time frames. So if we can talk about those, that would be a good start to initiate the conversation.
Sure, Priyank, and once again, thank you. I couldn't tell why anyone would be interested in what my life's about, but now that we are at this forum, I appreciate it. And to be honest, I'm much more comfortable listening to somebody's life story. But honestly, I think all of us have a journey of our own. Mine is, I think, epitomized by a very strong sort of individualistic way of taking decisions that have shaped me to become who I am. So, for example, the fact that, and this is perhaps the best kept secret amongst a number of us in the legal circles, but a lot of us, when we've got our guard down, say that we've been general counsels or we've been lawyers by default. Because we felt like we weren't great at anything else, or because we just happened to be in that space. No shame in saying it. It's more important that we got into the space and did something that made a difference to others. So I feel like there are those who are blessed with clarity of thought. I was quite high in terms of my desire to balance my professional and personal needs. I did feel like I wanted to do something that offers immense professional satisfaction, lots and lots of personal happiness as well, because I think I saw far too many and read about far too many cases where people were compromising their personal goals for a success that is ephemeral, right? When you're done with working for a job, you look back and say whether you made it worth it. And then, of course, you look for professional and financial recognition. So I felt like my journey has been one of somebody who started off my career with the brashness and enthusiasm and exuberance of somebody who's young, fresh out of college. You change jobs because I don't like this, don't like that. And I, with this sort of strange confidence that you'll get somewhere. But I think, you begin to learn a number of things. Part of your achievements are not about just getting a job, but to keep it, to deliver well. So I did about 14 years of private practice, and it's been about 11 years plus now of in-house. It's a simple enough story. That's what it is. But of course, there's a lot of choices in between that I've enjoyed learning from.
Interesting. Do you recollect any incidents which prompted you to take law as a profession in your career? Like, what was, or any influential figure who made this impact, and then you said, you know what, I also want to be a lawyer?
I think it took a while for us, those of us who've grown up in a really STEM-focused society like India, where there is this surfeit of engineers and doctors. And, I am Gen X at the end of the day. So I was perhaps the last generation where parents were considering wanting their children to be engineers and doctors. I was lucky because I had a family that allowed me to make the choices that I would wanted to make. I felt like early on that my strengths were probably in the areas of communication, analysis, and eventually some amount of problem solving, but not of the
Hmm.
mathematical variety. And I think that really got me thinking. I only started doing law, and then I seem to have found my groove, Prayank. So very
Okay.
often people look at a career option, and this is India. People work hard and eventually make good. But I was until graduation on a fairly steady path without any clarity on what I was doing. But when I did law, something changed within me because I felt like my grades were better. I was doing better than most people in my class. I was achieving the academic results that were required, and
Hmm.
ultimately, I think that kind of helped me to gain confidence that I could do this. And then, of course, I think everything kind of fell from there because I was always kind of keen to explore different sectors of law, different formats, including some litigation, mostly
Hmm.
corporate. So yeah, I would say that it was a process of self discovery which gained some fruition when I actually got to law school, and I felt like, hey, I may be decent at doing this.
Okay. Understood. So basically, getting into the law school made you feel that you may be good into this, and this is something which you can do for the long, like pursue like a long career, and not get bored of it, because
I
every day is
told
a
you
surprise.
I told you I have a field of thinking that is left field. To be honest, I most people have clarity before they join law school about what to
Hmm.
do well at law, but I think I got into law and then said I'm doing okay. It's just how my trajectory's been.
Interesting. And would you say the same things which help you take a decision to get into law would also be applicable in today's time? Like when a young kid who's watching us, let's suppose he's in plus two, and he's pursuing and or confused about what to do next. Do you think the communication, the analytical reasoning, and the problem solving skills are still valid today in the time of AI when everything can be just solved like just a prompt away?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think a couple of points to those who are young, and I never thought I'll give advice to people because it was most exasperating to receive it when I was younger. So therefore, this is not aimed at anybody. But if some people do tend to find value, I think it's very important that when people make career choices, right? And we will get to whether law is one of them, and it's still lucrative or what have you. It's important for you to understand where your relentless curiosity takes you.
Hmm.
It's very hard to describe, it's abstract, but the way that most people will eventually find confidence in their choices is when that curiosity drives them unconsciously towards a certain part of the you know the their career and their professional choices. The second, of course, is things come clearer and quicker when you're good at something compared to the others. So I think to those who are young, my advice always is to continue to make choices, but have the confidence that you'll eventually get there. And of
Hmm.
course, there are those who are blessed with making choices right from the beginning that are clear, but no harm in taking your time and jumping through a few hoops before you get the confidence you need. So far as doing law, especially in the area of AI is concerned, I think great point. The days of a unidimensional attorney are over.
Hmm.
If you had conventional expectations on litigation, corporate, anything, international lawyer, human rights, environmental, everything is changing radically because, AI will entrench itself.
Yeah.
The only difference is my view, and I have a strong one yet, is that for the foreseeable future, humans will always be in the loop. I
Hmm.
think AI will be assistive, and therefore, at least over the next decade or so, I would think that your choices around doing law is one that is perfectly valid so long as you understand that you have to be ahead of the curve of the assistive technology that you will receive at AI. That's not so difficult, Priyank. Think back to
Hmm.
your own career on and you're much younger than me, so I don't even know if you ever went to a library. But a whole lot of people
Of
don't go
course.
today because they have everything online. But some of us did
Yeah.
go to a library, and now we don't because we have those resources. When we're doing case law research, we have electronic methods of research. So I think the reshaping of how legal research and the practice of law itself happens is not going to be overrun by AI.
Hmm.
That's my view now. Yeah.
Understood. Understood. So at the beginning, you mentioned about almost like 11 plus years of law firm practice which you have done, like you're part of the uh, law firm setup itself, and then you decided that okay, now it's the time I should move in house. Most of the people who join the law firm sector or the practice, they often think about what's the right timing, like when should they make that jump or the shift from law firm setup to going to the in-house. What typically should be considered before making that jump, and why did you make that jump? What was your motive behind? If you can explain that, that will also help a lot of our viewers to get some clarity on how to take these kind of decisions.
Yeah, look, Priyank, I am speaking to an entrepreneur, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore it'll be easy for you to understand. Entrepreneurs are wired in a certain way. They believe they have a better way to execute something that they see somebody else do. That's one format. The second is that absolute genius entrepreneurs find a vacuum and decide to fill it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the third, of course, is those who've reached a point where there is an organic shift from doing work for somebody else to saying, I think I can do it on my own. Um, Law firms and lawyering offers that option to you. It is very much a practice based field, so to speak. And I think from my point of view, I've always, as I said, been fairly individualistic with my choices. And my
Mm-hmm.
choices were centered around the kind of institution that I'd like to associate with. I've, of course, been very thankful for wherever I worked. But as I worked in those institutions, I felt like I wanted to create a workplace that had a mix of a certain type. And I felt like that could be achieved if I could fob one and then bring
Okay.
the stars together and align them, right? So again, I'm talking work ethic, I'm talking work atmosphere, I'm talking future proofing and upskilling. I was thinking of that about 15 years back as I ran a very small boutique firm. And I felt like because the one key part to our story, at least, is that, I'm part of an emerging economy that is now so growing so fast that there are immense opportunities. So,
Mm-hmm.
a combination of sensing an opportunity, identifying a vacuum, or getting to a stage where you believe you're mature enough to now pull things on your own. I think these are pretty much the drivers across lawyers and what have yous, right? So my journey is not different in that sense, but I
Mm-hmm.
also felt like all of us eventually marry our passion with the realities of our life, right? For
Okay.
example, you run a fantastic outfit, but you will always have a point of view about what kind of outfit you want to run. When I mean what kind of a outfit, what I think about is what weight category do you want to have a bout in. Is it welterweight, is it middleweight, is it heavyweight, right? And I think you,
Yeah.
as you go on with your profession, you want to say, am I making it to the next weight category? Do I have what it takes? And if not, then I'm going to repivot and do something else, right? You have a whole lot of,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you follow cricket or you follow tennis,
Yeah.
but you can think about a number of tennis players who were not individually brilliant but became great administrators or fantastic coaches, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
great players
Yeah.
who never became great coaches, right? Think Ivan Lendl in the 80s. Think Boris Becker, who didn't do much coaching. Think of more recent, I haven't seen Federer coach yet, right? Or
No.
cricketers. So in that sense, short answer to your question, because I digress, is that you kind of entrepreneurial spirit leads you to move towards a in-house role,
Mm-hmm.
towards a law firm private practice role. But equally, in-house can be very, very enticing for a number of us, because you also start to feel like, I've been a generalist for so long, I want to bring my domain down to something narrow and become really good at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than be a master of all. So again, maybe thoughts in different directions, but those are what play in one's mind as you make these career decisions.
Interesting, very interesting parallel you draw from entrepreneurial to be it law firm practice or be it a counsel role. But often, like in current times, I think even the in-house counsel role has also become more often like an entrepreneurial role, where the counsels are being given more responsibilities and they have free hand to execute things the way they wish to design and get things done.
It's You're 100% right. I think business no longer wants general counsels to read the law to them. I also
Mm-hmm.
think that it's also, as I said, a combination of addressing three constituencies. One is you address, and maybe this brings you to kind of think about whether if there was somebody in my position who was starting in-house 10 years back, what advice would I give them? Or somebody who's young who wants to build a role
Mm-hmm.
in the in-house space. And I think, you kind of think about three things. One, if you're going to be part of a high-performing team, you've got to be able to address business problems. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
be able to think beyond the established framework of law, because companies are constantly looking at evolving based on market requirements. And I think we should be
Right.
no different. And the third, of course, is that you've got to be able to do this in a way that is institutional building focused. I
Mm-hmm.
think in house, the one big difference is you begin to understand that I am part of a whole. And
Mm.
therefore, I must collaborate with other functions to be able to take my aspirations towards a common goal which aligns with the organization. And the second is that I must leave behind an institution that has processes, that has content, and that has, I would say, a legacy of institutional knowledge which will carry on beyond individuals. So I guess that is the expectation today out of most sort of business leaders. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say that any of these three things that I've mentioned to you is very similar to the roles that entrepreneurs want to run, except those who want to hold really closely held companies. Most entrepreneurs today want to build something big and let the institution survive beyond them. I've seen that
Right.
level of objectivity in their aspirations. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the similarity I see, Priyank.
Interesting. Very, very enlightening. So, sort of, tell me about an instance or a decision which you had to make, a high stake deal, where the data was telling you one thing, but your intuition was telling you something else. Then, how did you arrive at the conclusion? Like, what did you do in this situation?
Um, I have to confess that that question tempts one to give an answer of the fact that you had an intuition on something and it worked right. But I have to also tell you that your intuition can be wrong in equal number of instances. Most of us
Yeah.
tend to not look at our losses because you shouldn't. You kind of the key point that I think you're sort of bringing out, and perhaps again something that you confront with, is that you've got to be able to think on your feet. I
Mm-hmm.
was at a discussion where people were talking about what a general counsel's playbook is on dealing with some of these choices that we make every day. And I think after we spoke in an elaborate way, the summary of our input was that you've got to be able to react real time with the muscle memory of professional expertise that you've built over the years. Okay,
Okay.
so there could be a number of examples, but I can tell you that we've had situations where we've seen, for example, a large deal that is competitive,
Mm-hmm.
and we are proceeding on trying to back that deal. Every company has that one deal or two deals
Right.
in their early trajectory which they think is going to be really critical to their future. It was one of those kind of deals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had everything lined up. And of course, a competitive tender is never an easy process. But we felt like, it's going to be tricky with the competition we had.
Mm-hmm.
Truth be told, we had a situation where it seemed like we had the most favorable sort of bid in that tender. And and despite that, there were certain issues in the tendering process which had led to a situation where we could not be declared outright winners. Now that
Mm-hmm.
is problematic because in ordinary circumstances, if you've had a long trajectory of working on business, you kind of and especially in an emerging market, you work with market inefficiencies. It could be a
Mm-hmm.
process issue, it
Yeah.
could be a macroeconomic issue, right? But on this one, it meant a lot to us. It was early on in our trajectory, and our leadership was pretty clear in saying, if we've won this bid fair and square, then how do we enforce our rights? Now, again, my intuition said that this will go either ways because of certain parties that were involved in the transaction. Also, the fact that I think let's be truthful about the fact that adjudication and dispute resolution can take time. An
Yeah.
organization's time is money, right? If you do not get immediate recourse or early recourse,
Correct.
by the time you get the benefits or your matters adjudicated, the matter's stale already, and you moved on with your business strategy. So I would say that this wasn't a as much as just my intuition as the fact
Mm-hmm.
that there was a strong passion in some of the leadership here, members of the leadership who said, "Let's go after this." And I think The intuition part was that we're on the right side, we've done everything okay, so let's make a solid case. We did engage in dispute resolution proceedings and eventually won the award, right? Which is of course great for the organization. So I feel like that was a happy story that stays with me. But
Hmm.
for the purpose of this podcast and in general, cautionary tale, not every bit of intuition that you have is necessarily actionable. There's I have also learned in this in my career over the last 11 years in house,
Hmm.
that one has to try and avoid the crusader complex of winning every battle single handedly. One,
Okay.
you can't. And second, you can't do it by yourself. And also you got to choose your battles. It otherwise you're going to have a challenge in being in a state of constant flux. You've got to be able to factor in some market inefficiencies and move forward in some cases. So
Hmm.
I don't think you asked me about an instance where the intuition didn't work, but I had to say that again because I feel like this has got to be a real conversation. In the real world, things suck sometimes, and you've
Yeah.
got to, cop that.
Hmm. So I have a follow up on this. The best case scenario is, of course, when you are backing your intuition, it is working out. However, the worst is when you have back, let's suppose, the data, because you had past experiences where data has always been proven right. But you know for the fact that, yeah, my intuition is telling something else. But because the data was up there, it was telling you some story, you ended up following that trail, which resulted into an outcome which is not favorable
Sure,
later on,
sure.
right? So how do you make peace in that time period when you have already taken a decision, you have said yes to the data, and now you're fighting a battle within yourself until the outcome comes, that I wanted to do this, I wanted to do that, and then the outcome comes which was not favorable. I'm sure
Of
you must
course.
have been part of, I mean, you must have had many instances during your last 15 years. How do you make peace during this time and post the outcome also comes out?
Oh, I mean, when you put it like that, I think one of the important factors for most of us is um, there is some thought process around avoiding over reliance on data because it could lead
Hmm.
to distorted results, or there could be intrinsic bias in that data. And I think, the skew needs to be identified early on. But as you said, sometimes the data is overwhelming, and I have to confess that in a market such as India, and when you're running a business that, for example, in our case, we're listed, and I don't speak as the Kyndryl General Counsel, but I also as a professional. In most cases, when you're listed at stock markets and analysts are looking at your performance, it's data driven. It's your
Yeah,
revenues, it's your signings, it's your profits, it's your
yeah.
cost
Numbers,
cuts,
numbers
what have
game.
you, right? So my sense has been that um, you work with the data with the guardrails that I've just mentioned to you, which is to avoid over reliance. I'm
Hmm.
also in my manner of working equally left brain, so therefore I do tend to marry instinct even if it goes wrong along with data. And I also try and see if there is an ability for a leadership collectively to constantly second guess the data to eliminate the biases and skews that might be
Hmm.
part of it. But honestly, Prayank, and I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for, once we've taken a decision based on certain data, there are innumerable instances where I've gone back and said this could go either ways, right? But I think that is a dangerous and dark place that you don't want to
Yeah,
be. One has to
exactly.
have the ability to say, I did what I could and I took the right decision at a point in time. Hindsight vision is 2020, right?
Hmm.
And therefore there is no point fretting. So you've got to be a little, I do not mean to be philosophical, but you've got to have the ability to seize the moment, take the decision, but then move on impassionately. And I think,
Hmm.
again, to close this, just this loop, when I deal with the dissonance of data versus my instinct and the outcome being radically different from where I want it to be, I remind myself that, the wins that you get or the losses that you encounter based on a
Hmm.
combination of data and instinct should ideally have you remain at a constant, even flow. That helps you to be not perturbed when you've lost and not be overly exuberant, right? So it's a practice start and one tries.
Hmm. Interesting. So basically, it's important to move away from the decision once you have taken that. I think that
Absolutely.
brings the peace.
I think
That's
so.
the
All
summary in
leaders
nutshell.
must eventually remember two things. One, that you've got to, some decision is better than no decision. I
Yeah.
really dislike indecisiveness. And the second is to remember that all of this is essentially a function that you perform with the data, the capabilities and skill sets you have at a point in time. If it didn't turn out the way you want, don't beat yourself up about it.
Interesting. Now, as a general counsel, Saurabh, you must have had countless incidences where you need to do negotiation. You must have been sitting on the negotiation table, be it for deal closing or for business deals or for M&As. Tell me, is it difficult to do a negotiation with your internal teams, leadership, stakeholders, or the external parties or the vendors and other people who are outside the organization?
You've asked a question which merits a much longer discussion when we don't do a podcast. Not one that is in the public domain, but look.
You can be 100% honest with your fingers crossed.
Look, I think very, very interesting question, and I think fundamentally, the problem with this entire approach of how organizations are structured is the need for straitjacketing. Okay,
Mhm,
and when I mean straitjacketing, it means three things. Okay, one is at the outset when an organization comes together, it straitjackets people. You, Mr. Lawyer, stick to legal. You, Mr. Finance, stick with finance. You,
right.
marketing, do marketing. You, sales, do sales. You, ops, do ops. Right. um, I think that very, very, in most cases of very, very successful companies,
Mhm,
leadership discussions are almost always overlapping for all of the individuals outside of the lanes that they stay in. So I want to
mhm,
re-emphasize the fact that one is this entrenched position has to go in today's world, from business
okay.
of lawyers. I think lawyers are also bound by as much intrinsic bias about what business should do, right?
Mhm,
Without
yeah.
understanding that inherently entrepreneurial spirit requires risk. And as lawyers, we are trained to mitigate risk. How do you marry
Correct.
the two? That is where the conflict arises. And that's where I think both people need to come halfway. So, halfway.
Mhm,
So, for example, we are running or we will be running a program soon where we're talking to our business teams and saying, can we make better lawyers out of you? And can you make better business persons out of us? Right? I think
interesting.
that is the key. And unless we do that, you're going to be entrenched in your sides of the lanes. And that
Mhm,
then, of course, it will cause the dissonance. The second is, I think that the reason why most people tend to avoid, sort of appreciating this and creating a conflict scenario versus a collaborative one is because of the lack of empathy. One
mhm,
has got to develop a very high level of empathy towards the function that other professionals are performing. That doesn't come by merely, reading the Buddha or by some external
mhm,
knowledge. It comes by being in the same place that others are. So sit in negotiation rooms and you walk away with as much investment into an outcome as the business teams. And I think when you're in the negotiation room and business is listening to you navigate through a difficult scenario, they appreciate it because they know the logic of what you're saying then and there in the room, right? And
mhm,
therefore there is increased collaboration. So in that sense, I think we've been quite fortunate. I've been quite fortunate in that. But I also want to say that some of this will also get easier as you grow on in your career. When you're very early on,
understood.
Priyank,
Mhm,
it's hard because you're trying to first build your legal chops. Then you start to
right.
go outside, right? And then you start to reshape and think laterally, whether it's about commercial issues, pricing.
Mhm,
Also brings me to my last point, which is that it is not only an attitudinal shift between teams that are performing different functions in a corporation, it's also the way that we are educated and trained and inducted into organizations. I really think that we have to induct people to say that you are here for a common goal. And of course,
mhm,
you will not be called upon to, for example, crunch this Excel sheet and create a discounted cash flow number. I can't do that. But I can
right.
sure sit with you over a cup of coffee and understand why that discounted cash flow is important. So next time we're talking enterprise valuation, I'll
Mhm,
have my to say there. So it
interesting.
requires a reset of expectations and a reset of attitude right at the beginning of the organization, and then of course it starts to get smoother. The conflict does reduce.
Right. So maybe because now it has been 15 years, you are able to navigate these conversations very fluidly as compared to when you started. And I think this
For
is
sure.
this is also very important to have, like, win the trust of your team, because when you're new, they're testing you. The more and more you prove yourself out there, I think the trust keeps on increasing, and now whatever you're saying, that carries a huge weight as compared to maybe when you started.
For sure. And I think, some of this is also self belief, Priyank.
Hmm.
We are all entering the room when we are younger on in our careers and saying, I'm the lawyer, I will read out the law to you. Okay.
Right.
But I think as you move on and start to gain more experience, you say, you know what? I think part of what you're saying is logic. So let me contribute with my point of view. I may not be, and I think all of us have heard decisions that say, my take on a financial point of view is this, but Mr. CFO, ultimately I would
Yeah.
defer to your call. That is the
Correct.
input you need. And that does come
Hmm.
over a period of time. Some of that can't be accelerated. But as I said, part of us lawyers' ability is to be relentlessly curious. I said this at the beginning of the
Hmm.
podcast,
Right.
and help your teams to understand that that curiosity is going to future proof you at some point of time. When just a plain lawyer will not work because AI is there, then you're going to need
Correct.
commercial lawyers. So things like that.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. So I have, like, in last 6 7 months, Saurabh, I've interviewed almost 120 plus general counsels across India, US. One of the things which I got very happy about certain things, and one of the things were certain lawyers now are also getting board seat into the corporates, and I haven't seen this culture, or, like, I don't know, it's, should I call it a cultural shift or change in philosophy or thinking of the leaderships, but lawyers are getting seat at the board table. What are the key qualities which are helping lawyers navigate this route and open the doors at the board level itself? Curiosity, yes. Business alignment, yes. Negotiation, of course, the lawyers are the great in that, but there has to be something else which is helping the lawyers get that seat and command respect at that higher level. What do you think is helping the lawyers move up the ladder?
I think the single biggest factor that has come into play is one that I will describe, and perhaps you're too young to factor in, but you would have read about it. We are moving to a rules based order on how businesses run in an emerging or semi emerged economy like India. So
Hmm.
to give you an example, until the liberalization process started in 1991, and we really started to sort of confront it as professionals in 2001 to when I started my career, right? That's
Okay.
when I started to look at some of these foreign investment laws. You start to look at corporate governance, you start to look at intellectual property, right? And you look at a bunch of other things that go beyond the regular industrial and labor law regime, right? Which was
Hmm.
what was constituted a majority of our business environment, right? That has, I think, led to an evolution where people are saying, look, there is a whole business aspect that I need to look at within a revised regulatory regime. And by the way, I think we had quantum leaps in the way that our legal and regulatory framework evolved from 2000 until, I would say, the first 15 years of this century. From
Okay.
15, 16 onwards, I think we've been refining, no dramatic new laws, but we've been improving on whether it's competition law or our
Yeah.
Companies Act, etc., etc. So, with that happening, corporations now have a higher accountability towards the spectrum of stakeholders that they work with,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
Corporations are accountable to their investors, they're accountable to their regulators, they're accountable to their customers, they're accountable to their collaborators, they're accountable to their employees, and they're accountable as a corporate citizen themselves, right? In
Hmm.
each of these six categories today, I think we have a fairly clear rules based order that says you can do this, but you must not do that. And I
Hmm.
think any leadership which at an initial board level was pushing through a lot of promoter based decision, right? In
Right.
that scenario, I think the promoters were clear with the decisions, and the directors were rubber stamping, and therefore the requirement for perhaps those who were known to promoters directly rather than relevant professionals. I would say that the trend of having lawyers sit on the board of corporations is part of a growing trend of not only lawyers but also some seasoned finance professionals have always been on
Hmm.
boards, but also a number of others who bring in now some very specific, we have customer advocacy experts, we have ethical
Okay.
experts, we
Hmm.
have compliance experts. So I feel like the evolved regulatory regime is helping leaderships to get different kinds of inputs that they must use as they project their corporation's existence,
Hmm.
right? You have to be seen not only as being a corporation that is successful, but also doing the right thing. So I think lawyers have a small part to play, believe it or not, in helping people do the right thing, no matter what their impression is of
I'm
lawyers.
sure. Awesome, awesome. This was very well put. So because of the changing regime and the regulatory uh, improvements which are happening all across the country and across the globe, the promoter-based decision making is now shifting towards more of what is right versus
And
what
which is
needs to be done,
professional assisted decision
which is
making.
professionally
That's right.
correct. Yes,
Indeed.
I think because of the compliances, the regulators, and all these regular checks, I think the more accountability is what is coming in, and that's why having someone like us is able to play that part very well.
I don't mean to be rude, and just to quickly close this out, 40 years back, small and medium businesses and even medium to large businesses had the promoter's friend who could have been a chartered accountant or an accountant
Yeah.
who basically took legal calls, right?
Yes.
There was
Yes.
no
Of
contracts
course.
that were
Correct.
negotiated. There were no sophisticated indemnities. There was no rig fencing of assets.
Yeah.
Also, I think just to add the factor of globalization,
Hmm.
almost every decision you take, whether it's tariffs, whether it's foreign investments, or whether it is your ability to, acquire and grow in and out of the country, almost all of that now requires a thinking which is far beyond just one person's domain. So you need a
Right.
collection.
So, in your career, Saurabh, have you come across a situation where, let's say, you are talking about either funding or an M&A situation, where because of strongly held IP, the decision has changed or the valuations changed significantly because of IP?
For sure. In fact, I've been very, very lucky to be part of an acquisition that was entirely IP focused.
Okay,
And it
interesting. Would
was,
love to know the details also,
oh yes, yes.
if possible.
It was
Yeah.
a decade back, and I think it taught me more about IP's monetizability than
Hmm.
any licensing regime or any amount of proper sort of IP portfolio advisory would have done. I think one of the things is that in my current role, as well as the one immediately before this, I was working for a company which was involved in IT services and products.
Hmm.
That immediately brings forth a number of considerations. And this is
All right.
one company that has immensely evolved IP sort of management and portfolio practices. Right now, this particular acquisition was super important because how do you value the IP itself? Right. Uh, Again, maybe this is the most cliched question that anybody can talk of because inherently you're talking about an intangible, right?
Right.
And then, of course, the regime that one is dealing with, right? So the IP regime, for example, when I work for media companies, right?
Hmm.
Whole IP window depended upon whether I was working for the little guy who was the IP developer, or I was working for the guys who eventually monetized it, the guys who
Yeah.
had to work for higher rights, right? Whether it's these large enterprises corporations. I happen to be with the corporations, advising them most of the times. But in this particular acquisition, one of the things that fascinated me was the IP in itself was highly niche for
Hmm.
a particular sector, but had very, very low comparables. And despite
Hmm.
all of these advantages, I think the fundamental lesson that I saw was that after it had achieved critical mass, it simply couldn't grow beyond because it did not have reach.
Hmm.
Okay. And to give you an example, I think I'm speaking to the or preaching to the Pope here when it comes to IP because you understand this much better than I do. But look, when you're preparing in the services business a boutique of certain IP, right? If you own one tiny part of that boutique, the value is pretty low. But if you
Right.
are in the conventional sense a system integrator, then you have the buffet before you, and then you work with customers and say, I will I will select six solutions that add to your overall architecture, right? And it is
Right.
in that context that that IP acquisition worked very well because it was an addition to the bouquet of services that one could offer, right?
Hmm.
Not all of those IPs are in-house. You will of course work with third parties, but the ability to now go and offer an end-to-end spectrum of solution meant that a whole lot of people were talking to you, right? And
Correct.
saying, I want this solution end to end. Think about going as a promoter with that one tiny part. The problem is that most businesses will say, when I have my overall IP or my overall solution scenario worked out, I'll tell you if I find place for you. So I think that is one fundamental difference that I found, right? And
Hmm.
let's also let me nuance this input by saying that we're not talking about the IP of, let's say, one of the world's largest software that runs on our laptops today, or one
Right.
of those, because they have pretty much become the equivalent of a must-have. Let's talk about
Yeah.
IPs that are niche, right?
Yeah.
So I found that when we acquired that IP, then I think one had the ability to monetize it a lot better. And I think
Hmm.
that was part of my one of my notes to you, because even though I'm not an IP lawyer, I think that one of the critical things around IP really is to try and understand how is it that you can balance the inventor and the creator rights against a need to encourage innovation, right?
Yeah.
I also feel that acquisitions of IP by large corporations, of course, has a conventional point of view of saying, look, you're cornering technological advances. But what about promoters gatekeeping technological advances? Or not consciously gatekeeping them, but simply not having the ability to take something that can be deployed for the common good? You and I must eventually start to think of a scenario where we are working to either incent the innovators or developers to work on a balanced licensing regime so that they can continue to evolve with products. And then, of course, remove barriers like prohibitive costs or have situations where large
Hmm.
corporations corner benefits. But but most of that is eventually going to be handled by the IP law and licensing regime that governments run. So our stake is to work with promoters. In this case, for
Hmm.
example, we
Hmm.
work with the promoters. The promoters were happy because they made a significant multiple. We did
Right.
well because it was a significant acquisition that we could dovetail against it, and
Hmm.
all was well with the world. So I think it was a fascinating peek into the window of this, even in a peripheral sense, for somebody like me who had not had access to that kind of a paradigm before. It was lovely. It was great.
Interesting. Very, very beautifully put. So one of the things which you emphasize, and it's something which I often tell to people is, it doesn't matter if you just have one or two IP. What matters is, are you protecting the entire system together? So that if somebody wants to take your services, they have to come to you, and you can offer them the entire bouquet,
Yeah.
or the buffet, saying that this is what we have built. This is how each and every part can be integrated, and you can't bypass us because we hold IP for everything end to end.
Absolutely.
Most often than not, the organization do not like the, not the mature organization, but the small organizations, they do not realize the importance of protecting everything whole end to end. They just go ahead with one or two key use cases or the business use cases, protect that, and end up leaving everything onto the table, which others ultimately
Yeah.
uh, take away from
Abs-
them. So
Absolutely.
those,
Very well.
like many situations I've seen like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the little guy who has assumed that, my creation is one that people can't do without. But what you don't realize is,
Exactly.
larger corporations have interests that have a range of solutions, and if you're one small part of it, then there is going to be asymmetric bargaining power, because, if you don't offer it, they will find somebody
Yeah.
else to give that solution. So very interesting.
Correct.
Yeah.
Very good. So that also brings me to the next question, Saurabh. If you were to start a new career altogether in today's time, with the way AI is shaping up and everything, and I'm sure you are using it a lot also, what trajectory would you choose now, considering you can't go back and be the lawyer or in-house counsel? What would be that career which you would love to choose in today's time and scenario?
It's a really hard one to tell, because I think, I feel like we're in an immensely challenging space right now. I
Hmm.
think this is the most challenging phase of my career in the last 23-24 years that I practiced law. Because
Okay.
when we started out, we never thought that there was going to be the kind of disruption that there will be today, where in 2 years' time, right? I was listening to a podcast yesterday, which was from 2022 for some 2023 or 22 for some particular reason. Okay. And in
Okay.
that podcast, somebody said, there is a thing that is getting developed called Chat GPT. And I was smiling to myself and saying, hey,
Interesting.
buddy, in 23, that's what you said. In 26, it's part of every search I do. So, what
Yeah.
I'm saying is, I find it immensely challenging because there is a constant reshaping of commercial,
Hmm.
um, legal, regulatory, and even to some extent financial boundaries, right,
Hmm.
that are associated with technology. And I think technology is now becoming such a major part of businesses that you can't afford to ignore it. So I'm actually in a state of, I would say, in the midst of a creative disruption that is really, really taking some time to reconcile as it is. Therefore, when I think about the possibility of starting something or thinking about what else I would do other than this job, I want to say that at the moment, I'm not short on challenges. That's what makes most people want to move jobs. They want to move jobs because they're short on challenges. I think there are so many business problems to solve
Mm.
currently. I would want to continue to solve business problems. And, for those of us in large organizations, we get moved to roles every few years. So you're constantly trying to solve something new. It's an immensely humbling experience because you start from zero. The other thing I want to say is that, look, I've been an entrepreneur for 5 years when I ran a boutique law firm earlier.
Mhm.
And then, of course, now I've worked in the relative security of a large corporation in the legal department, right? I think I am a lot wiser. Therefore,
Okay.
I will want to find a value proposition that is linked to a vacuum. I don't see that right now because
Mhm.
I think legal advice is highly generic at the moment. This might be controversial,
Okay.
but when things started in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, if somebody
Mhm.
said, I want to advise on private equity transactions, equity structures were not tested.
Yeah.
Debt structures were not tested. International funds had not flown into India at all. And therefore, the ability of first movers was really high. Today, I
Mhm.
feel like if I do something with my career, it would be relating to emerging technology because you've got to do something where you are either a first mover or beyond those who already who you know or beyond those who might not understand this as well as you do. So I
Mhm.
feel like emerging technology is something that I've had as a default, and that's something to work
Okay.
on. But again, as I said, you've got to find something that is high in terms of uniqueness of delivery and proposition. I see some of what you do, and this podcast has you controlling the narrative, so I will not interrupt it. But I see how you speak about the organization you have co-founded, and I when I was advising startups, which is what I did in
Mhm.
my law firm, I said, why aren't law firms funded? Right? And then,
Yeah.
of course, I see
Yes.
your profile and I see you position yourself as essentially a solution provider, right? So you've
Mhm.
taken off
Yeah.
the high horse of a law firm and run as a solution provider. So I would like to think laterally, as I said, think of a value proposition where today which is underserved, and at the
Mhm.
same time which is linked to emerging tech so that it meets my professional satisfactions. But I think all of that
Okay.
is too big an ask at this stage.
I'm sure ChatGPT can help you with this.
Yeah. That's where I'll
just
go.
just put just put the transcript of this conversation, and ChatGPT will tell you easily five professions where you can make a mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can build you a business plan also around it.
I suspect so. I suspect so. And I think that in itself points to an excellent question, which is that, for guys like you, as you work with customers and you're an entrepreneur yourself, as you hire talent, as you hire solutions, I think it's so difficult for you to find something which is a value proposition that is different because most people have come to you with the same rules of reference when it
Yeah.
comes to researching and value proposition. So you're like, okay, tell me something different, right? Really
Yes.
hard question, Prayank. I think one that a number of people will grapple with very soon.
Even I am asked this question a lot of time by my friends and people around, saying that what will you do after that. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I
I
don't
think
have
there
an
is a
answer to this. I
default.
mean,
I
there are
think there
many
is a
things.
default answer to this question. I'll run a cafe. Everyone wants to run it in India, right? A nice, beautiful cafe that they think will make money for them.
A cafe in the Himalayas.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Yeah, either a cafe in the Himalayas or a shack in Goa. I think, yeah, those
Yeah,
are
yeah, Shaq and
quite
Goa. Yeah,
default answers that
exactly,
we give. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Awesome, awesome. So, Saurabh, we are almost at the closing note of our conversation. I really enjoyed this. Just before we wind up, I have one simple question for you. If you were to condense your 25 years plus of experience and create a playbook out of this, what would be the top three things which you would like to give away as a secret to anybody pursuing this career or anybody watching this? Like top three giveaways of yours.
Um, I think it's hard to sort of think about whether one does this consciously. But yes, if you synthesize some of your beliefs over the past few years, especially as in a leadership role, here is the first thing in my mind, which is that you have to have high performing teams built based upon not pigeonholing people in their expected roles. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is
Okay.
fundamental to me today, because I think the next generation isn't just satisfied doing a cookie cutter role. In my generation, most people spend maybe 10 years in one job and then flip to another and then
Yeah.
another. In my parents' generation, people did a flat 40 years of one job.
Right.
The next generation is not going to be happy with more than 3 to 4 years, because they look to radically reinvent themselves, right? I think,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's peer pressure or call it whatever. So I feel like you've got to be able to manage people differently, their expectations, be sensitive to that, and permit them to reinvent themselves. The second advice for
Mm-hmm.
sure that I'd want to give to people is befriend technology or perish. And it doesn't matter what kind of law you practice. If you are not going to work with technology, and if you do not understand the intervention of technology and IP, especially in your career, right? I don't know any career that is removed from technology or IP in today's world.
Not at all.
So
Yeah.
befriend or perish, and avoid over reliance. Remember humans in the loop. So remember that we are still in a generation that perhaps will have assistive technology before it decides to, become
Mm-hmm.
a Space Odyssey 2001 Stanley Kubrick kind of, dystopian world, right? My last is a point that I think is a softer element, which is that I
Okay.
think ultimately we all do this as human beings, and therefore be inclusive, be
Mm-hmm.
respectful, think about professional considerations, but also create happy work environments amongst teams and workplaces. At the end, that's what matters. And this generation, as in the one after me, places a
Mm-hmm.
very high premium on that. No amount of money is going to make them okay to tolerate toxicity. So I would think that allowing them their individuality and creating a happy space would be my third
Got
input.
it.
Again, this is just a regular guy making that advice, so there's probably better stuff from others who are thought leaders.
All right, understood. Very good, Saurabh. Thank you so much for sharing the profound wisdom with us. I really enjoyed the conversation and the laughter which we shared on the podcast. I'm sure people who are watching us can also learn a lot of things from you on this one. And yeah, thanks again for giving us your precious time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, and maybe sometime we should do a podcast where I hear your story, because I think it's much more fascinating and interesting than just mine, right? So more on that. But again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I would love to
All
do
right.
that also with you. Yes, thank you so much.